This is day 67 of my 6-mark challenge for AQA GCSE Science. If you look in the description below, you'll find a link to all of the questions in the series so far, and also a playlist with all the videos where I'm going through the answers. Today's 6-mark question is another example of a method question. So once again, it's time for me to remind you that this is not an essay question. In your GCSE Science exams, you're getting credit for laying out your answer in a logical fashion, but that doesn't have to mean full sentences or paragraphs. It can absolutely be bullet points or a numbered list. And you might even want to consider making yourself a little plan in the margin or a bit of white space before you start. And if it's somewhere that your examiner can see it, they can still give you credit for that, even if you then haven't gone on to write the full answer, maybe because you've run out of time. It's also worth considering with a method question like this that you should be indicating how you would do these various things. So how are you going to assess pH, and how are you going to assess the number of clover plants? So if you haven't done so already, pause the video and give yourself 6 minutes to answer this 6-mark question. Before we actually start writing our blow-by-blow method for how we're going to do this investigation, it's worth thinking about which equipment we're going to use and how we're going to use it. So to assess the number of clover plants, we're going to use a quadrat. And remember, this is one of these square grids, or it could be rectangular, and sometimes it's got intermediate divisions, although not always. It could just be a square outline. And we can use that quadrat either randomly or systematically. Now, if I was assessing an abiotic factor that was going to change in a predictable way, say if I was assessing moisture content, and I could go from right by a river out into a field, so it was gradually getting less wet, or if I was assessing light intensity and I was going from the middle of some woodland to the outside and it was gradually getting brighter, then I might want to make a transect and assess this systematically. But for pH, it's quite hard to predict how it's going to change. So even if I had a transect, I'm probably not actually going to be able to say, oh, the pH is much more acidic on this side of the meadow and it's much more alkaline on this side of the meadow. I'm not going to have that information in advance. So actually random sampling is probably a better idea for pH. And then in terms of that assessing that pH, I'm going to use a pH meter. And what I'm then going to do is I'm going to compare the pH in the places that there's lots of clover plants to the places that there's not a lot of clover plants. A lot of people fall down when they're describing random sampling because they describe something that isn't actually random, like turning around and throwing the quadrat over their shoulder. Well, that's not going to be random because you're the one who is deciding how hard to throw it. And either you're always going to throw it the same distance, or you might try to sometimes throw it further and sometimes throw it less far, but then that's still not random. So we need to start off by actually describing how do you do random sampling. So what we're going to do is to split the meadow up into a grid and then assign coordinate numbers to that grid. So we could have 1 to 10 along the bottom and 1 to 10 up the side. And then either use a random number generator, or you could use a D10, so that's a dice that has 10 sides to it, to give us those coordinates and therefore say, okay, we're going to assess quadrat number 12 and quadrat number 27 and quadrat number 78, or whatever it is. Then in each quadrat, we're going to measure the pH using a pH meter, or you might call it a pH probe. And we're also going to assess the percentage cover of the clover by counting the internal divisions. So sort of saying, oh, in this quadrat, we had 20 of the little intermediate squares were covered. Or you could do it if it was counting the number of clover plants as well. That would work too. And then we're going to compare the percentage cover of clover to the pH. So the easiest way to do that would be a graph like this, and what this would show me is that when it's very low pH I have less clover, and when it's very high pH I have less clover, but in those middle sort of more neutral pHs, that's where I get maximum clover cover, and that's probably where my clover is happiest growing. I'll be back again on Wednesday with another 6-mark question for chemistry. This time it's one that kind of crosses over between Unit 2, Structure and Bonding, and Unit 7, which is Organic Chemistry. Don't forget there's a link in the description below to all of the questions so far, and also the playlist of videos where I'm going through the answers for each one. Thanks very much for watching, and I hope to see you again on Wednesday for day 68 of the 6-mark challenge. If you are finding these videos useful, then don't forget to like and subscribe for more GCSE Science content coming soon.